Hey everyone, Jeremy Toeman here with another episode of Founder at 50. My guest today is Mark Ely, whose journey started in tech support, and 19 years later he was the president of Sonic Solutions, where our paths first crossed. We'll talk about the challenges of building hardware, which he experienced firsthand from the ground up at his startup SimpleTV. But the heart of this episode comes from hearing Mark's joy of tinkering in tech, and then how he pays it back today by mentoring entrepreneurs via score.org. Mark also has great thoughts on how passion, patience, and curiosity are your best guides no matter what you're building. Thanks, Mark, for sharing these stories and for a great stroll down streaming media memory lane. Also, thanks, Mark, for being one of my first 5 episodes. Let's get started. Hey there, Mark. How's it going?
Hey, Jeremy. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for joining me here on my Founder at 50 podcast. As I told you and everybody listening, this is one of my first few episodes. So still working a few things out, but having gone back as far in our careers as you and I actually go, I think we're going to end up having a ton of fun things to talk about here today.
Yeah, cool. For sure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So do me a favor. I would love for you to start with where you ended your last thing, and then we're going to go from that right into where you started your career. And then later we'll come to where you are now.
Where I ended my last official gig.
Yeah.
So my last official gig was VP of product at Roku, and it was actually product strategy. Before that, it had been product management. And so my sort of area of expertise was launching consumer electronics products. And what I was doing was helping run a team that defined streaming hardware and got that built and designed and marketed and launched and into the hands of millions. So that was a super fun gig.
Awesome. Now, let's go back to, let's say, anyone in that 21 to 25-year-old time frame in your life, Mark. Where were you then? And we're going to figure out how you got from there to there.
I started my career at a place called Sonic Solutions, and it was a company up in Marin. It was actually founded by a bunch of people that had left Lucasfilm back when Steve Jobs bought Pixar from Lucasfilm. The people in the DroidWorks division started a new company called Sonic Solutions, and it was all digital audio, really early digital audio hardware to edit content for music production, for CD production. Actually pre-CD. It was like the very early days. And originally it was sound restoration technology. So really cool stuff. And I would sort of, I was super into that in college. I'd run my own recording studio and was really into electronic music and all of that stuff. So when I found out about this company, I'm like, oh man, I've got to work for this place. And I started off there in tech support.
Wow. And tell us a bit, so because I know a bit about where this story went. So you started in tech support.
Yeah.
How long did you stay there, and where did you end up? And by the way, we'll talk about it, but it is while you were at Sonic that our paths first crossed. So I know this company as well.
Yeah, it was really cool. So I joined in way back in '92, and I was super excited to work there. I was there for 19 years, and which is kind of amazing when you think about tech careers. But honestly, the founders were amazing people, great mentors, really smart people, and we were doing cool stuff. So 19 years later, I had gone through, kind of gone up through the product track. I was product manager, then I was VP of marketing, then I was a general manager. Then they sent me to business school. I did that. I came back. Helped manage and grow the company from audio to video to DVD to ultimately streaming. And we wound up acquiring a bunch of different companies, including Roxio and Divix and a bunch of other sort of 90s technology companies that were doing digital media. And then we ultimately sold the company, and I was president of strategy at the time we sold it. So I went from tech support to president in 19 years. And and had a great time, fantastic people that I worked with. And I really loved it. It was a cool experience.
Now, when you were getting started there at tech support, people I'm talking to, everybody's a little different. Some are very much, I was 25, I was tech support, but I knew one day I wanted to be president of this company. And other people are like, yeah, and then I just woke up the next day and did a new thing. What were you more like? Did you have a vision? Did you have a plan, or did you, or an aspirational plan of where that was going to take you?
I had zero plan. I had, and it was sort of like I was just into the technology. Like
Mm,
I had mastered some music and done some, digital recording using really early tools when I was in college. This is like, I remember, this was back in the days where you had physical hardware to do audio processing. And
sure.
I had mastered an album for a group and we ran it through an early design system. And I remember waiting like hours for it to normalize the audio. And we were so impressed that it did that. And then I saw what Sonic was doing, and it did it so fast and it was so elegant and visual with waveforms and all sorts of stuff. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So when I showed up, it was just like, hire me. I just want to work here. This looks so cool. And didn't have a plan. And it was literally like they put me on the phones before I knew anything about the system. And
Yeah.
I was always like, I'm going to put you on pause for a second. I'd hit the pause button. I'd hit you on, I'd put them on hold, run back to the back of the company, find the engineer that wrote the software, ask them questions about how it worked. I mean, it was like bananas. And then I come back and I'm like, oh yeah, no, you have to do, yeah, you do this and you do that. And it was just that early experience of just being deep into trying to figure out how this technology worked, having instant access to engineers and hardware people. And, it was so cool.
That's awesome.
So there was no plan. It just started there. And very quickly, they pulled me off the phone and they're like, you need to be product specialist. We're sending you to Tokyo to install a system for Sony Music. It's like,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
right. Okay. So we'll do that. And it just, I would just love the product and the technology and I love talking about it. And before long, they said, oh, you should think about product management. I'm like, what's a product manager? I never even heard about what is that? And then fell in love with that. Like, oh yeah, I get to decide what sort of features and I get to talk to customers and I get to work with engineers. I mean, that's amazing.
So, Mark, you say they said a lot. Let me push a little on this. Was there a person or two that maybe took you under your wing or help you navigate from rung to rung? How did that happen for you?
Ultimately, it was sort of the founders, Bob Doris, who is the founder and CEO, and then his wife, Mary Sauer, who was the VP marketing. The two of them were amazing, just incredibly smart people. And Mary would just push me and just throw a ton of stuff on my plate and I'd have to figure it out. And Bob had this great strategic vision. And just working with both of those folks was really remarkable. It pushed me hard. At the same time, kind of they threw more in my lap than I could probably handle. But also we're there to basically say, oh, yeah, well, think about it this way. Or they were also encouraging. So it wasn't just, a ton of work. It was
Sure.
also a lot of encouragement. And that was great. And that lasted my whole career there. And of course, along the way, we had different senior managers that came in that understood marketing and, taught me more about, what to do there, people that understood, business development and, oh, what do you do there? And how does that work? And so, um, but it was really the founders who kind of believed in me and pushed me and helped me in my career there. And that's really one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did.
Well, so that gets me the opposite question. So we know a bit about why you stayed. Were there moments where you thought, "Hey, I've been here 2, 5, 7, 15 years. I should go somewhere else."
I think there were probably multiple times I quit, just, emotionally, physically, just being wiped out, working crazy hours, and doing more than I felt that I could do. And I remember one time quitting and I was, working for Mary. And I said, Mary, I just can't do this anymore. I've got to go. I had no plan. I was just completely burned out.
Yeah.
And I just remember she just looked at me. She's like, oh no, and she took me to lunch and talked about it. And I'm like, all right, I'll stay longer. I'll stay longer. She's like, I won't be randomly throwing stuff at you nonstop, and so we wound up getting a better rapport there, and that helped me stick around because I really love the work. I love what we were
Right.
doing. And then ultimately, I thought, I should go to grad school. I need to get an MBA. If I'm going to be in this business, in the business world, I need to be able to speak the language.
Okay.
And I knew I was going to, it's going to stop me along the way. And luckily, I talked to the founders about leaving and going to B school, and they said, don't leave. We'll pay for it. You go to B school, do an executive program, and then stick around for a couple years afterwards. And I thought, oh, that's great. So I
That's
did that. I
great.
went and just did weekend program and exec program, and I did that for a bunch of years. And that was another reason where I thought I was going to leave, and then I wound up staying. And it was actually cool because I was then applying all the stuff I was learning at B school, or using real world case studies, with our customers and everything else that was going on. So that made it worthwhile, and that was a cool experience.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about that. So I was one of those people that I graduated, and it was as if they shut all the schools permanently. I could never go back. I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
Did you always have a hankering to go back? Like, was it always in the sort of back of your head, I should go do this sometime?
So yeah, it was kind of funny. Loved doing product. As a product manager, you become sort of your own like general manager, right? You're kind of thinking about the whole business of your product, not just, what buttons go where, what's the drop down menu do, what's the customer journey, that stuff. You're thinking about how do we make money? How do we fund it? How do we scale it? How do we, and so that part of it, I felt like, what, I really need to go and get some actual, real education here. I mean, I was a liberal arts student, in college. I had like zero preparation for the world. It was sort of like
Interesting.
philosophy and psychology and political science and, but nothing about like, okay, how do you do a balance statement? What's your cash flow? What's the, what's marketing all about? How do, what are the, what's the customer, what's the customer experience going to be? How do you finance something? All of that stuff. And so there's a hole there. And as I got more responsibility, I was sort of getting pushed into more of a general management role at Sonic. And I was like, man, I gotta learn more. If nothing else, I need to be able to, be able to come into a board meeting and present to a board, or be on
Sure.
an investor call, or do whatever it is, and be able to talk the language that the people that are running this business talk. It felt like it was a requirement for me to get to the next level of what I wanted to do.
And so then did that in turn end up with a board meeting? Was there something where you then look back at like, oh my goodness, this B school, like everything just sort of set you up, and now you're this whole new MBA
You
executive
know,
version
you
of
know
yourself?
what's kind of no, it's kind of funny. I really enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed the professors, the cohort that I was with in B school, and but in a funny way, it's like I remember bringing more of my skills from working at Sonic to my B school presentations. Like I was the guy in charge of presentations. I was the guy that set up the AV system for doing stuff. I was the guy that was figuring out how to approach a particular company about doing a marketing study, and it's because that was just the real world stuff I was doing every day. So it presented a little extra scaffolding around what I already knew, but I think it also presented a level of maybe credibility in a way for me that otherwise wasn't there. I mean, not that I signed my signature with MBA,
Sure.
but it's like, it's funny. It was just it was sort of slightly additional, but it was not transformative.
Okay, fair. Mike, I wanted us to take just a few minutes to try to reminisce a little bit about some of that late 90s, early 2000s connected home era, because that's when we met. I
That's
was at
when we met.
Mediabolic.
That's right.
I was at Mediabolic. It was before Sling.
Yeah.
You were at Sonic because we were
Yeah.
trying to get Sonic to license the Mediabolic tech stack,
That's right. Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
get network connected things. I threw out about 3 months ago, I think it was a total of three, good sized boxes full of RCA, S video, composite, coax, serial parallel, and all the other cables I had been accumulating over the years.
Yeah.
You still have yours because I know you must have had one at some point.
Oh my God. Yeah. So many. It's amazing how the world back when it was sort of like digital was starting to show up, but it was still like physical media, connecting devices, Ethernet cables running around. I mean, the Wi-Fi, no. HDMI, no. Composite, it was, maybe component video if you're really slick, 480p resolution was amazing. It was such a different world. And I remember it was sort of that those early days where things were like strung together like spaghetti to try to make something happen. And I remember those like we had a bunch of technology. I forget where we were at the time. We were doing digital video. We were doing DVD authoring. We were
Okay.
trying to figure out what's the next thing. Like we had built products that help people make DVDs, and that was like huge for Hollywood. It was this huge, obviously growing. Consumers were doing it at home. So now we were selling, software and hardware and products for home, and we were thinking, oh man, how do you do something that's really interesting? How do you start to automate the stuff? And I just remember seeing some of those early demos from Mediabolic and being like, oh my God, these guys have figured this out. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Look at all these things you can control. You can route video and audio and whole home and all, and it was just like mind blowing. And it was still like fully jerry rigged together, you know?
Still during.
Yeah.
I moved into an apartment recently, and all I really ended up hooking up was a sound bar and a plasma, not a plasma, and a flat screen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's one HDMI cable, and that's it.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's unreal to me, and I miss it. I can't quite explain. There's part of me that recognizes just recently, and I'm sure you have it in you too, is that whole set in my brain that is really good at connecting surround sound systems and AV receivers and preamps and post amps. That is the most useless part of my brain at this point, I think.
Yeah, totally. You get like a sort of a set of pride knowing that you were the one among your friends who could come over and just troubleshoot any sort of system, and they were all mystified.
Yeah.
And
oh my God, you got the sound going. Oh my God.
It's really true. It's cool how much easier it's gotten. Still has a long way to go. I mean, now, of course, all of the troubleshooting I'm doing now is, trying to log into devices, get them to connect to the Wi-Fi network, do that sort of stuff. But it's not running cables anymore, and that used to be a lot of fun,
Right. So when folks like you and I are trying to connect with younger folks, and we talk about things like, oh, it was agony, but also kind of cool to be able to learn how to do AV wiring and all this kind of stuff. Do the kids today, for lack of a better word, have the same kind of playground of technology?
It's shifted, right? It used to be technology was hardware, right? It was how do you wire things up? How do you connect them? How do you get it to all work? How do you balance it all out? How do you create this experience with hardware? And now the experiences are created with software, right? These are software experiences. It's sort of, and so the conversation now is, oh, I'm using this app and that app, and it's not as tangible, right? It's virtual. And so, and there's still complexity in trying to, stitch different apps together, get different experiences. But even that's getting more simpler and simpler and simpler. I mean, now it's sort of like you just type a prompt in and bing, now you have an experience. You've got a photo, you've got music, you've got audio, you've got, I don't know, it's really changing. Part of me feels, maybe a little nostalgic for the past, where you could sort of wire all this stuff up and see how signals flow through from one place to another place. And now it's just, play me some music and do a video display and hit go, and then, ChatGPT spits it back out. And there it is.
Right. I do think, and you touched on it, I do think that everything about generative AI to me landed in a really interesting time as sort of this newish sandboxy playgroundy thing where, like maybe you make a picture, maybe you make a recipe, maybe you write code, maybe you do your taxes. Who knows? It just does all the things.
It just does it. Yeah, that's right.
Right. It's like having a Swiss Army knife, but every now and then when you pull out the knife, it's actually like plastic or something. Like you're like, well, it doesn't cut. I thought it was supposed to cut. It doesn't quite do the thing the way you were expecting it to. Which to me implies that somewhere down the road, we're going to have the next phase of this where it's like, generative AI, it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Like vibe coding won't be fun in a few years. It'll be like, that's all just now. All those systems have sold out.
Yeah.
Is there still tinkering in tech that's fun for you?
There was this sort of interesting maybe analogy that's not too many years ago, but there was when 3D printers showed up, right? Suddenly it was like, oh shit, I can make hardware and it's cheap. Yeah. And then you sort of go down this path of like, oh, I can tinker and build hardware. And then you say, well, how do I turn that hardware into a business? Well, it's super cheap to get the prototype. It's super expensive to like do the tooling, get the manufacturing, build and that was this weird thing, where you had all these hardware startups that sort of flared up and then realized, oh my God, that we can't possibly build this at scale and make money. That's really hard to do. And there's a funny thing happening in software too now. I feels like, I don't know if this quite holds, but I feel like there's really fun tinkering, like vibe coding sort of stuff that's going on. So you can do something really quickly. And then 2 months later, you can say, well, I didn't even have to do any of that. I can just do one prompt and it just generates it. Right. It's sort of like, well, now it's getting so easy and the barrier to entry is so low that then it becomes like, well, what's the value of tinkering with this? I mean, it's sort of like, it seems like it's almost, it's sort of eating itself in a way. You know what I mean?
I agree with that. And I think about like the pace of innovation, right? Should I go get invested in learning how to use Cursor? Or if I wait 3 months, will the next version of Cursor actually just simply get it right the first time? I think about learning how to code in HTML,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like, like no JavaScript, folks. HTML, right? How to pull off little hacks. Like there were certain browsers, like the earliest days of Mozilla or Netscape Navigator wouldn't support different tags, and you have to like
Yeah,
layer tags inside of other tags.
yeah, right.
And now you go to a tool like Framer and you say, design me a landing page for my new app, blah, blah, blah. Here you go.
Yeah,
Right. But the faster this moves, I think, and the less time we get to really enjoy that tinkering experience, the faster we sort of get into that ennui phase of it right away.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me, thinking back to the joy of wiring up ancient AV systems. There's something about knowing how the signals flow, right? How it gets from point
Right.
A to point B, from the disk to the processor to the decoder to the analog output to the wire to the amplifier to the to the speaker to the transducer to the it's like, oh, I understand how this works, and I've got a mental model of how things flow, and you sort of build up your mental circuitry that understands how signals move around. And the less we learn about how things work under the hood, it feels like we're losing something there. Like you talked about HTML, like trying to do that early HTML, software, to where you're kind of coding stuff. I'm trying to get it to work, and like, oh God, it's the wrong color, or it's not the right width, or
Yeah.
the tags aren't working. Now it's just like, make me something that's as beautiful as this other site, and bing, and you just have no idea why or how, and it feels like we're sort of like, in some ways, sort of taking down the kind of mental, scaffolding or circuitry that we would have had to understand how this happens.
Well, I think
And there's
that's the
something lost
natural.
there in a way, right?
For sure. I think that is the natural way of things in a way, right? As
Yeah,
our systems evolve, right? Like you and I probably at best when we were young, like found it interesting to like push a typewriter key and watch how the hammer moved. Right.
right. Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
right.
remember that feeling because we had a typewriter and we were at the very end of that, and not old me, that's not the point. But it's understanding that connection. Like if you use the typewriter, you can understand the printing press
Yeah,
from right,
yeah, that's
like
right.
all the way back.
Right.
I built computers in the 80s as a part-time job. I still think in terms of motherboard, RAM, storage. I mean,
Yeah,
we no longer have a CGA, EGA, or VGA card to choose from.
right.
When I look at my kids, not only don't they know anything about what's inside the computer, they also don't really understand how the internet itself works, right?
Right.
And I mean, most people don't know how the internet works, but even just the basic concept that it's like your thing has an IP address, there's a router somewhere in your place, that thing's like a big traffic cop, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
just even that part, right?
yeah,
It
yeah,
is a fascinating time. I think our generation is the storyteller of the transition, effectively, from a mostly analog world to a whatever. I'm not going to say mostly digital, but you could argue that we spend more time digitally these days than not.
yeah. That's right. It's interesting. You talked about like tinkering. Do I still want to like tinker around with stuff? And it's kind of funny. I sort of think, not just is it evolving so quickly, but it's so quick that if I'm going to tinker on something, it's like, what am I going to generate? I mean, is it going to be worth anything in a few months?
Right.
And it's almost, and it used to be like when you were building a product or you had a great product idea, there was a barrier to entry, and the barrier to entry was fairly high. Like you had to really love the idea because you're going to have to find people, get engineers, get designers, put a system together, raise money, or use your own money, use your savings. And so the barrier was so big, you really had to be seriously invested in this idea. And then you'd start it and it would either succeed or fail. 90%
Right.
of the time, fail. But you would try to do there, the barrier to entry was so high. And now, in a funny way, the barrier to entry is so low that it's sort of like, oh, well, do I really have a good enough idea here? And if it is good enough, is somebody just going to copy it with something
Right.
better in 2 months and just post the same app or the same product? And it's going to be interesting to see how this sort of evolves. Like the systems that are kind of behind the scenes here are where all the sophistication is, and
Yeah.
we're basically just prompting. That's kind
So
of where it
so
is.
now let's tie our journeys together. What was the actual year that you left Sonic?
I left Sonic in 2010, 2011.
All right. And what year did you start Simple TV?
2011. Yeah, right
All right.
after that.
So roughly how old were
Yeah.
you when you started it? Because you were not the 23-year-old at the help.
No, I was in my 40s. So, but interesting tidbit, most startup founders are in their 40s. Yeah.
What was going on right before you started it? Were you like, I'm going to do a startup, enter SimpleTV? Were you tinkering an idea?
It was kind of interesting. I mean, it was, we were sort of at the end of the journey of Sonic Solutions. So Sonic had acquired a bunch of companies. Most recently, we had acquired Divx, which did like MPEG-4 for,
Sure.
consumer electronics. And then not just long after that, we had interest from another company, Rovi, that, essentially wanted to acquire Sonic and all of the companies that Sonic had acquired. So we got onto a path of selling the company at the end of 2010, I believe. So
Okay.
it was just I realized that was going to wind down, and my job I could either continue along and join Rovi and be part of that team and continue running various aspects of what was the old Sonic, or do something different. There's always that Peter principle where you get promoted to your level of incompetence, right?
Yeah.
I kind of felt like that. I was president of strategy. I'd done a bunch of, I've done some of this M&A stuff. I'd helped, get that done. I wasn't great at it, but I was really passionate about the products and the technology and the people and what we could do. And that sort of carried the day for me. But ultimately, I wanted to do products. I love being a product manager. That was
Yeah.
the most fun thing I ever did, in my whole career. And I was like, I just want to build a product. And one of the companies that we had acquired along the way was Cinema Now, which was
Oh,
one of
right.
the very first like download to own video formats, right? It was like, just at the time that Netflix is going and moving into streaming, Cinema Now was out there. Movie Link was another one.
I was
And
consulting with Movie Beam at the time.
Movie
Remember them?
Beam. Oh
Remember
yeah,
them?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's oh yeah.
And then and Voodoo and
And
yeah.
Voodoo and that stuff, right? So it's like early days of trying to figure out how that was going to go. I just thought the future is going to be downloaded or streaming video.
Yep.
And for me, I thought, well, this is a cool opportunity to do a consumer electronics product that people could use to stream TV around their homes, to their tablets, to their phone. And that was sort of the germ of the idea for Simple TV.
What you ended up doing for
Yeah.
those who might not have heard?
So the whole idea of Simple TV was to be able to take free over-the-air broadcast television and then stream it anywhere in the world, or any device in your home
Through a box.
through a box.
Right.
Exactly right. This is me coming from my hardware sort of background. You put a box in the home, and because you're capturing it at home, you sort of have the right to do what you want with that stuff that you record and capture at home.
Yep.
And so the idea was then you could then play it back out from this box, and you could stream it to a Roku device in your home. You could stream it to your iPhone, to a tablet. And we set up a neat relay server so you could move that stuff around easily. And it was a super cool product. It made it really easy to take free television, which you could get with an aerial antenna, which most people still don't know exists, but yes, there's free television. And then get that to any device. And so the whole pitch in 2010, 2011 was, you don't have to pay for all of these super high cable services. You can get the same stuff for free and stream
Right.
it to your iPhone. And so that was the whole pitch. It was an arbitrage for media, for streaming media.
Like it was almost like TiVo and Slingbox had a baby.
That's exactly it. It was the TiVo Slingbox baby. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. That's a better elevator pitch.
How long did this journey go for you? Where did you end up with things?
I was mentioned earlier about, how it seemed like you could prototype hardware really easily, but actually getting it to turn into a business was hard. Man, it was hard. Hardware is hard, and doing it for a consumer electronics, targeted product that you have to sell for less than $300 or $200 and make any money on it at all was super challenging. So we raised some, venture capital. We won some awards. We shipped products. We shipped a couple of generations of product, trying to get to scale and keep our costs down and insulate ourselves from supply chain issues. I mean, it was just so hard. I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about all of the pitfalls that we ran into. But ultimately, we realized, man, we need to pivot. We can't do hardware. We need to do an all software solution. So we came up with a way to take a smart TV's tuner, use that as a way to capture the video, and then stream that to a cloud service. So we basically could just run as an app on a smart TV and not have to sell a box at all. We could just sell a subscription. And so that was the pitch. And we sort of pivoted to that, started getting going on that, started working with smart TV manufacturers to get that integrated and working. And then we just ran out of money. It was just like, it was just a bridge too far. Our investors were tired. It was hard to keep it going. And so ultimately we had to wind down the company.
And if you could have whispered one thing in a younger you's ear, not like buy Bitcoin, but like a piece of advice or a way to think differently or process, do you think A, you would have still done a startup or not? And B, what fundamental shift you might have done differently?
The fundamental thing that I would do is I'd say, don't do a startup.
I think that becomes
the second thing I'd say is, if you do a startup, don't raise money. So it's hard. I mean, doing a startup, it's funny. I think part of the culture that we're in, especially in the Bay Area, where there's so much innovation and so many cool startups, you mostly just hear about the ones that are successful, right? But so many startups never make it, right? It's the anomaly that makes it. And it's the super anomaly that turns into a unicorn, right? That sort of creating a company is super, super, super hard. If nothing else, my wisdom would, to a younger entrepreneur, would be just like, really think hard about it. The most valuable thing you have is not money. It's not your product idea. It's your time. Yeah. And what you're going to do is you're going to sink a minimum of 5 years, maybe 10 years of your life into this. So you better love it. Love what it is you're doing. If you don't absolutely love it, then you're going to be bummed. I loved it. I loved what we were doing. I did it for 7 years before we, folded the company. And it was fantastic. It was super stressful at times. It was incredibly fun at times. But if I didn't love the technology and the people and what we were trying to do, there's no way I would have made it that far. That's the number one thing. You better love it, no matter what it is. Love it. And then also don't raise money if you can avoid it.
I mean, you just touched on so many important topics in there. The road, no matter what you read in any publication, any podcast, anyone you hear, like that was never the actual road. That was the smoothed over. That was like the photoshopped road.
That's right. That's right.
One way or another. There's always some little thing that you didn't quite account for.
Yeah.
Right. And so that love is the thing that keeps you going. Yeah. Were there moments where you were like, man, I just wish I had a job somewhere? And then vice versa, were there moments where things were tough and you're like, I don't really care how tough this is. This is what I want. This is why I'm here.
The answer depends on where I am in the journey.
Sure.
The further out I get toward the end, the more I'm like, man, I would just love to have another job. Just like, it'd be so much easier to work for somebody else. But early on, I was like, it was the greatest thing ever. Showing up at CES and winning Best of Show when we launched. I mean, that was crazy. I mean, that was just an amazing time. I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I mean, it was the most elated, incredible experience to start getting, external validation of your ideas and people see it and want to buy it, and, doing our Kickstarter and having the Kickstarter be successful. That was awesome. But then, after 5 years, 6 years, and it's like, oh my God, we got to raise more money. Your equity stake keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. You're trying to keep it going. You want to, make sure your investors get out somehow. You want to keep this thing alive. It just gets so hard. It's so hard.
You started your first startup in your mid-40s.
I did. Yeah, that's right.
Looking back on it, are you glad that was the age? Would you rather have done it when you were 25, where we all know our energy levels are higher and all that, but it's a different kind of opportunity cost?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mentor, a bunch of like younger folks through SCORE. When I talk to younger entrepreneurs, it's like they don't know what they don't know. They've got tons of information, tons of ideas. They're completely ignorant to what's going to happen, but they have a ton of enthusiasm and energy. And you can figure stuff out. If you've got enough enthusiasm and energy, you can sort of, bust your way through to a certain amount of knowledge and try to create something that makes it happen. If you know enough about a particular business, you at least have answered a lot of the hard questions somewhere in your career. So you're better oriented to understand what's going to come at you, and you're better prepared for it. I think generally, when you get an entrepreneur that's in their 30s or in their 40s, and they've been at other large companies or even mid-sized companies that are in their general industry, they come with knowledge of how to just make that better, make a better product, make a better customer connection, make it cheaper, faster, whatever it is. And you get a head start that way. So I think there's something to be said about being a 30s, 40s-year-old first-time entrepreneur. ideally, if you've got a little bit of cash in the bank, and you can afford to not pay yourself for some period of time or take a reduced salary or whatever it is.
Right.
Now, I'd say the conflicting challenge and the challenge that I had, I was ready to do that. I also had a young family at the time. It was challenging putting all the time and energy in and trying to also make sure I got enough time for my family and doing that. And that's hard. I mean, because if you think you're putting in a lot of hours working for somebody else, I mean, you're putting in so many more hours when you're working for yourself.
It's completely true. And I think the point around like when and how old your kids are is also a thing. Like when I've spent more of my career in startups than not. And yet when my kids were a certain age, it made a lot more sense for me to go be at CBS than the next doggy type of thing. I know you're doing stuff now that's different and really interesting and really important. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about what Score is. Throw in there a little bit like how you picked it, how'd you find it, why'd you do it, etc.
Yeah, so score.org is it's a nationwide organization. It was founded in the 60s, and the acronym used to stand for, I don't know if it does anymore, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. And the whole idea was you're in service to entrepreneurs, small business owners, people that want to start a business. And it's essentially executives that have retired generally, but not always. A lot of people are in mid-career or working. You have mentors that essentially volunteer their time and help small business owners, entrepreneurs just figure it out. What's a business plan? What's a cash flow statement? How do I market this? Is this a good idea for a product? Or, I'm running a psychotherapy business and I've got to figure out, how do I grow my business? How do I, work less hours, give more time to my family? What's interesting about it is it's just purely volunteer. Like, we don't charge a dime, but you're getting like high level consulting for free. And anyone can sign up. I mean, you just go to the score.org website and there's tons of resources, workshops, how to start a business. Here's how to do a business plan. Here's how to, here are the local laws that you have to comply with. So there's just those sort of tools available, but you can sign up to have a mentor. And I mentor folks. I have I've talked to literally hundreds of different, entrepreneurs over the last 4 years.
Wow.
I started doing it in my last year when I was at Roku. I wanted to start giving back, but I also knew that there's probably a transition coming and I wanted to have something sort of going. I actually found it because my wife had heard about it when she was listening to like the Clark Howard podcast. She heard about this thing and I'm like, what's Score? And I looked into it and we have a San Francisco chapter and I joined that chapter after some training and it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. And there are chapters everywhere. East Bay's got a chapter. There's a Charlotte chapter. There's a New York chapter. They're all over the U.S. And as long as you're a U.S. based business or want to start a business in the U.S., you can join as an entrepreneur, or to sign up to get a mentor, or ideally, if you've got some cycles and you're an entrepreneur, or even if you just have good solid business background and you want to give back, you can sign up to be a mentor.
Awesome, Mark. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, reminiscing about the old days of streaming tech and such. Again, I'm sure you and I could list out companies that the world has long forgotten and how important they all were to us at the time.
That's absolutely right. For
love
sure.
hearing your journey. Love hearing what you're up to these days. And I hope we'll get a chance to do this again as I continue to evolve the Founder at 50 podcast. Because I have a hunch we could tell a few more stories together.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was great to connect with you, Jeremy, again. Good to see you, and best of luck with the podcast.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you.
Take care. Bye.